Welcome to another Keylink live stream. We've travelled down to Banbury to the UK Chocolate Academy to have a discussion with the team about shelf life. Very scary subject, but hopefully by the end of today you'll feel more at home and comfortable with it. So today we'll be covering things like what we actually mean by the term shelf life, some of the methods and ingredients you can use to prolong your shelf life, as well as some of the terminology and ways of testing and your chocolates for that shelf life. Feel free to get involved in the chat with any questions that you might have. Have Anna answering questions and passing the more technical ones over to the team. And the live stream will be on our YouTube channel for further reference for you guys. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the team here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again. Yeah, so what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at what is shelf life, like Ewan said, because there's so many things that actually go into getting good shelf life. Is it your working methods? Is it the ingredients you use? Is it the process that you use? Everything can actually play into the shelf life. And we are going to look at some of different recipes. So we've got some already weighed out that we're going to show you. And also we've got some faults and things that we're going to look at.
Yes. So first off, we need to define what is shelf life.
I don't know.
So we're going to look at it in sort of two elements. So the first way to look at it is in terms of the length of time before the taste, texture, or general appearance of your product changes. Yeah. So again, one thing we suggest is you make a batch and you test it over time, because your product is a reflection of you and how your customer is going to receive it. So it gets to a point where you're not happy with it. Either you're not happy with the flavour, like it's lost a bit of its oomph maybe. Yeah. The texture has changed, maybe it's dried out, things like that.
Yeah, and also as a business, you're going to have to decide what kind of shelf life are you looking for. Because, you know, if you can sell your things quickly in a week or 2 weeks, there's so many options that you can do for your ganaches and things. But if you suddenly want to go to 6 months to a year's shelf life, then we have to start using totally different ingredients, and we have to add in other ingredients. And so we're going to go through some of those with you. Some of them are totally natural, and some of them are the alcohol sugars. And some people don't like to use them. So, you know, there is a point where you are going to have to make that decision. I don't want to use an alcohol sugar, so therefore I'm going for a 3-month shelf life. So there's lots of decisions that you have to make as a business as well.
Yep. And then the second part of what we mean by shelf life is a point where we get bacterial growth, where we get molds, where we get pathogens. And it's about creating an environment where either these can't grow or we make sure the customer consumes them before they can grow. So we're going to look at that as well.
Yeah, because again, we can give you all of the best advice for shelf life, but if you had somebody that came along and they had a dirty spoon and they put it into your glucose bucket, and, you know, we've got things growing in that bucket, then all of the other advice is no good. So, you know, it really goes down to that very first thing of really good hygiene, really good working methods, and, you know, like making sure that simple things like you're really well tempered, that you've really well backed off your chocolates and things like that, all of those really help.
Yes, we've got some examples. We could start with those.
We could, yeah.
Yeah. So what we've got here is we're going to talk to you about storage. So these chocolates that you're looking at, you can see they're the same moulds, but if I use my pointer, so these ones, you can see it's super shiny. These ones, they were from the same batch, but what we've done is we've changed the temperature of the storage. So we've taken it up sort of really high into the 30 degrees and then down really low into the sort of 5 degrees, and we've just constantly changed the temperature, and you can see it's had a really big effect on the chocolate.
So this could be like if it was in a shop. So you've done everything right, you've put it into your boxes,
yep.
And then once it's in the box and it's the summer and, you know, somebody's put the box near the window, and then the temperature rises and then overnight it cools down, this is what could happen to the chocolate. So, you know, it's still okay, but the actual appearance of the chocolate has changed.
Yeah, it's also a consideration if you're sending chocolates places. You know, we need to be conscious of the weather. I mean, I know in the UK we only get a week of sunshine, but we still need to be conscious of the heat and the cold and just that constant change. Like, chocolate doesn't like change. It likes to stay at a consistent temperature. So it's something to be aware of, that it can have a dramatic impact on your product.
Yeah. And also on there, we've got some of the taller ones, the taller chocolates.
Yes. So I think you can see the front, just at the bottom, the centre, the filling of this chocolate has come out at the bottom. There's a sort of little blob. So the chocolate has weakened and the filling has actually tried to escape. This is quite common with caramels especially. And again, it's because we've changed the temperature so much that the centre has expanded, contracted, and it's caused these issues in the actual quality of the product.
So if we think naturally, when we temper our chocolate shrinks. We need it to shrink to come away from the side of the mould, so that's how we get the chocolates out. But as it's shrinking, you know, when we've sealed it, it shrank, we're actually making that environment in the middle there smaller and tighter. So if there's any little gaps, if you haven't backed them off properly or anything like that, there's a pressure on the inside of the filling there, so it does want to come out. And caramel is the worst, isn't it?
Yes, caramel loves to escape everywhere.
Yeah, so we get lots of questions about caramel escaping.
Yes.
And the only thing you can do for that is making sure that you work really cleanly and that when you're scraping off your chocolates and things, you don't get caramel coming over the edge of the top of the chocolate, because even then when you seal it, there's still a little path for it to go out. Yep. And these were really nicely shelled, but they were really finely shelled. And so there isn't much wall structure there, is it? And so it's managed to get through.
Yeah, and so we love it when we get a nice fine shell. But sometimes if we're looking for the longevity of product, we need it that little bit thicker just to give it some stability and sort of insurance almost. We like to say to keep the sides the same thickness as the bottom. And again, that's consistent, but we just need that complete consistency in the depth of the shell.
Yeah, and if you look on the supermarket shelves and things like that, if you ever brought a caramel chocolate, you often find that they're in a milk chocolate. Because milk chocolate is softer because of the milk powders and the sugars compared to the dark chocolates. So it's a bit more forgiving and it doesn't crack as easily. And also you find if you bit into one of those chocolates that they're thicker. So they've actually got a thicker shell around them of the milk chocolate because, again, they're keeping it inside. So it's all little small details like that that really help you with your end products.
Yes. So I think we can segue meticulously into the next faults that we've got. So we've looked at bad bottoms. So we have some examples here of where, just as Julie said, we haven't backed off as well as we could have. So the filling has actually got in with the chocolate, and what's happened over time is the filling has dried out and it's kind of shrunk away. So you're left with these holes.
Yeah, and that one you can really see it's beginning to, like the filling is shrinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's drying out.
Yeah.
And that's going to give you a much drier texture. It could even become like quite crumbly over time. I'm sure nobody's chocolates would look like that. But we've gone for extremes here.
Yes.
And again, like when we're teaching about how to fill the chocolates, we're always saying that you must have a look at the mould and make sure you can't see any filling over the top. And this is exactly why. Because when you scrape the back of the chocolate, when you seal the backs of the chocolates, you actually get areas where it's quite thin, and over time that breaks down, and then that's when we get the fillings coming through.
And to be fair, these were made probably 3, maybe 4 months ago, so it has given that chocolate quite a long time to dry out. But what it does do is it also gives opportunity for other things to get in. So if there was any bacteria around, you can get that sort of cross-contamination, and then bad stuff can happen.
We don't like that.
No.
So we'll move that one and go on to the next. Mm-hmm.
So again, we're looking at the backing off. So in these bars, we've got a coconut caramel filling, and you can really see that we haven't sealed it very well.
Yeah, so as it's been too high again,
Yes.
hasn't it?
Yeah.
And so as you've scraped the back, some of the filling has come to the top, and again, it's just going to give opportunity for air to get in there, bacteria to get in there, and you will see that like breaking down a lot quicker than other ones. So this again is on your working practices. You can really help yourselves by working really nicely. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this one, Claire.
I think we might need to cut them first. So
Okay.
we've made some truffles, and I've tried really hard to do it badly. So the idea
That's
being
really
that,
bad.
The idea being that the ganache was a bit too thick, a bit too cold when I piped it. So there's potential for quite a lot of air bubbles in there. And we don't want to sell our customers air because it's not really fair. They're paying for chocolate. But also it gives opportunity for other things to get in there and create havoc. So that's not what we want.
They are creating havoc.
So yeah, you can really see that there's quite a lot of gaps
Yeah.
in that shell.
Yeah, that's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And, when we speak to people about making truffles, like you say, you put the filling in, and people often kind of just hold their piping bag at the top of the truffle, don't they? Squirt a little bit, and it looks like you've got a full truffle, but actually there's not enough filling in there at all. So if you are doing truffles, just get a little cocktail stick and just give it a little move around, and you would see then whether there was any air pockets or whether you are actually filling it. And we actually put the piping bag right into the truffle, don't we? And just slowly push it and let the filling fill up to the top and then come out. Because that big gap there, you will get mould growing in there. And when we talk to people about it, everybody says, oh yes, yeah, I know that one. Lots of people have had this problem. And that, again, is just down to how much filling's in there. So it's quite easy to resolve.
Yeah, and it's also, like, unless you cut it open, you don't know. So it is a good opportunity to sort of think, once you've made a batch, cut a couple, see what they look like, make sure you're happy with the quality, and do that consistently so that you know your product's good and that you're in good practices. Final ones, again, we're looking at sort of finishing and best practice. And what we've got here is we've used gold chocolate to shell and back off, but you can be too thin on the bottom, and then not only can your filling start to come to the top, but if you're using a really dark centre, you can kind of see through the chocolate, which is it's not great, it doesn't look the best, but it also, when you get too thin, that dark chocolate is trying to come out, and it's really not what we want. We want to keep that ganache in the centre so that it's, we preserve the shelf life. I don't know if you can also see, I'm going to try it, just around here, this shell is sort of cracking a little bit. I don't know if you can necessarily see, but it's one of those things that it happens every now and then with, oh, that didn't go to plan. That doesn't make you see it better, that just makes it fall off the slate. It's one of those things that can happen if we like to warm the mould and then put the chocolate on. If we don't do that, the base isn't sealed as well to the sides, and it's just another thing that can go wrong.
But apart from that, it's all right, Clare, isn't it?
Yeah. Who doesn't want to make chocolate?
Yeah. No, again, we've gone through it, but basically it is don't overfill your moulds. Yeah. Make sure you can have a really good seal on the back there, and that's really helping you because you're creating a really nice airtight environment then for the filling to sit in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and make sure that your fillings are really full into the moulds.
Yes.
No gaps.
No gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's that one.
Yeah, that's the bad thing. So
yes.
Now we want to get on to the good practices.
Yes. So, what can we do to help our shelf life? So we have something called AW, which is available water. And sometimes in recipe books, there's a Jean-Pierre Wybau, and Clare and Mark have just brought out a new book as well with some of the other Calabout chefs, which is The Chocolatier's Kitchen. And in there, these books have got an AW reading on their recipes. So that's really helping you tell you what the shelf life is. So if we have an AW of 1, don't eat it. AW of 1 means it's a ganache. It's most probably a bit like a chef. We have what we call a chef's ganache, 100 cream, 100 chocolate, and you mix the two together, and that makes a beautiful ganache. But actually, there's a lot of available water, which is what the AW stands for. And so that will grow mould in room environment in about 2 to 3 days. And so lots of people say, oh yes, I make ganaches, I pipe it out and I roll it and I cover it in chocolate. And you're like, okay, I hope you're not selling them. Because, they won't see it, but once it goes home to someone's house, you don't know where they're keeping it. So, that's really hard as well. Yeah. So what we need to do is look at all of the available water in all of our ingredients. So our cream has water in it, believe it or not. So if we have 35% cream, which is what we like to use for chocolate, whipping cream, it has, the rest of it, 35% is fat, the rest of it is considered water. If we use alcohols, Clare.
Ooh.
So we like to use alcohol. Cool, that's a lot of alcohol.
It's just Julie's personal supply.
Shh. But that alcohol there, that's Cointreau, and that's a 60% Cointreau. So that 60% is alcohol, that 40% is water. So when we're working out our recipes, we need to work out how much water is in those recipes, because that water is giving the bacteria and fungi and things like stuff to grow. So we have the water, we have the sugar from the ganaches for the food, and then we have the room temperature for the environment. So it's a perfect environment for things to grow in. So we need to stop that. And one of the ways we do it is we use UHT whipping cream as well. So whenever we open up that packet of whipping cream, we know that it's been heat treated, so there's no bad things in there. It's really good to use your local dairy and things like that, because you know you want to use that local, but you don't necessarily know what the bacterial count is of that cream. It's really good to ask them whether they've ever had it checked. But again, it's something that you need to think about.
Yeah.
And then purees?
Yeah, so it's similar to that. Again, we use sort of frozen or
Ambient.
again UHT purees, so that we know that there's no bacteria in there. They're normally around about 10% sugar, again, so we know what levels we're at. We're not suddenly going from a 10% sugar to a 25% sugar. We know what we're getting, and we know that it's consistent. It's not been freshly harvested in the garden. And
What's wrong with that, Claire?
But no, it's great. But in terms of hygiene, consistency, reliability, this gives you that insurance, really.
Yeah. And again, with that, so we think raspberry puree, we think, well, there won't be much water in there. But actually, nearly all of it is considered water, because if you think of the puree itself, there's not much dry component in there. So maybe it's like 4%, and you've got the sugar. So maybe at the most it would be 15%, and the rest would be considered water. So you can see there's lots of different areas that we are getting this water from that we wouldn't necessarily think of.
Yeah.
So to make a ganache and to give it a long shelf life, we've got to try and capture that water. And so there's different ways we can do it. We can make a sugar solution, so you like your caramels and things like that. We can do an alcohol one, or we could do a ready-made filling that's already got a long shelf life. So we're going to look at those now.
Yes. So I think the first thing we're going to look at is caramel, because just like Julie said, if we're looking for a saturated sugar solution, so we're going to start. Julie's going to make a direct caramel. Okay.
I hope.
If fire alarm goes off, don't panic. You don't need to evacuate. What we're going to do is this enables the sugar to bind more water. And when we're talking about water activity, it's bound water that's really important to us. Free water is the bit that goes off and creates trouble. So if we can bind as much water into our ganache as possible, then we're not going to get into trouble. So a direct caramel, it can take a little bit of practice, and it just needs confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're doing the direct caramels, it's called direct because you're doing it direct into the pan, and you're not adding any liquid in there, because remember we've said we don't want any extra water. So we can make a caramel just by slowly melting our sugars. So we're using the induction stoves, which if you've got one of those, they're really quite quick compared to the gas and things, and a lot more even. And I've just put a real small bit on the bottom, and I need to let that start to melt, and it will start to go to like a liquid. And when it goes to the liquid, I can add the next bit of sugar on. And I've got to just keep doing that, not adding too much. Natasha, I'm going to go to the side just so they can see. Ooh, can you see it's just going to the liquid now? So I'm just going to let that totally go to liquid, and then I will add some more in. But it can quite easily get too hot too quickly, and you end up burning the caramel, which I'm not going to do. Okay, so question?
Yes, we have a question. Could we also cover using coffee in chocolate?
Yes. So if we use coffee in the chocolate, is that in a ganache? So if we were going to make a coffee ganache, we would often use fresh coffee beans, and we would infuse the creams with it. So we could infuse the cream the day before so that we get a nice strong taste of coffee. If we wanted coffee flavour actually going into our chocolate, we could do the same thing. We could get coffee beans, and we could place it in our chocolate, and then we could leave the chocolate in a hot cabinet, and that would take on the flavour of coffee as well. If you didn't want to do that, you can buy coffee extracts. And again, you could add the coffee extract into the ganache. So there's lots of different ways that we can get coffee into the chocolates.
And we have a second question from Jeanette. Is direct the same as dry caramel?
Yes. Hi, Jeanette.
Hi.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you can see here, but I'm getting a bit of steam, a bit of colour happening in the caramel. So I'm just going to carry on. And Claire's just brought in the purees and cream for me. Sorry to keep speaking. The purees and creams for me. Now, if you're doing a direct caramel, the worst thing you can do is have cold cream and cold puree and pour it into this once you've made your caramel. Because as that cold cream hits the bottom of the pan, it causes steam. The steam pushes the caramel out and it can end up all over your hands. So it's really dangerous. So when you're doing this method, you do need to be careful. But like Claire said, we are making a solution, a syrup, that is going to actually bind the sugar in. So maybe you can show them the other sugars while I'm doing this, Claire.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about, we do have a ganache to show you that's a long shelf life using these different sugars. So to introduce them to you, I'm sure you're all quite familiar. To start off with, we've got glucose. So this is glucose one. It's just a clear sort of gel. So what this does is we look at something called the dextrose equivalent, and that means how sweet something is. So sucrose, what Julie's using, it's rated as a 100, and then anything else is sort of ranked in sweetness around that. So glucose tends to be between a sort of 60, 70 mark, so it's less sweet than sucrose. What it does in our ganaches is it makes things, it gives texture, it gives a sort of a gooiness, a chewiness, but it also means over time it keeps moisture in the ganache, so it's not going to dry out as quickly. And it's used quite a lot. Very similar is invert sugar. Sometimes we know the brand name Trimoline. Or
creme sucre.
Creme sucre, yeah. So invert sugar has a DE of 50, so again less sweet than sucrose and a little bit less sweet than glucose. It's used for exactly the same reasons. It gives texture, it gives mouthfeel, doesn't give as much chewiness as glucose, but it stops things from drying out.
Can I just show the caramel?
Yes. you may.
Thank you. So can you see now? I don't know how to show you. But I've got a lovely dark caramel. And then, so that is just the sugar that has just been melted. So we've not added any water into there, but we've got a lovely liquid caramel. And I'm just going to add glucose in that Claire's just been talking about. Sorry, Claire.
Very good. So, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why would you not put your glucose in when you're caramelising the sugar?
Because it stops it caramelising. So the glucose doesn't caramelise as well as the sucrose. Mm-hmm. So it's much better to do the sugar first and then add the glucose in. Sometimes, Claire, people add sorbitol in first. Okay. And they have liquid sorbitol and they'll put that in to give a base on the saucepan, and then they start adding their sugars in. And you can get caramel. So there's lots of different ways to make it, but that's just a simple way. So now I've added my glucose in. I'm also then going to add in my, this is a passion fruit and banana one, so it's really nice. I'm going to add in the passion fruit. Now when I add it in, you'll hear it. It really sizzles.
Sizzle.
Yeah, it smells beautiful. It's a shame you can't smell. Yeah. So this one here, I just add it in a little bit at a time, because if I added it all in at once, it'd be way too much. And then what you end up with is your caramel starts to go into little lumps and you don't get rid of them. So I'm just slowly adding it in.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next bit. Julie teed me up seamlessly. I've got some sorbitol here. So this is powdered sorbitol. I'm also going to show you, we quite often, so available through Keylink, we get liquid sorbitol, which is just as good, available in great big packs. But so sorbitol, we've been doing lots of Googling of
Sorbitol.
sorbitol. We've been reading articles on what it does. It's a sugar alcohol. What that means is it does, or it can potentially have a laxative effect. So if a person were to eat 20 grams of
A day.
sorbitol in a day, it would cause laxative effects. Now, that's a lot of chocolates. So we don't necessarily know that it's not gonna have a big effect, but you have to label your chocolates to say that these could have a laxative effect. It's an E number as well, so some people don't like using it because of this, because it's not strictly clean label. But in terms of prolonging shelf life, it's really, really good. So it's a really great moisture binder. It really encapsulates the water and locks it away from creating trouble. So it's a really great tool, but you have to understand the impact of using it for labelling options. The final tip I wanted to give you was dextrose.
Because that's too small for when it boils.
If we're using the powdered versions, it means we're not adding any liquid at all, so we don't have any water attached to it whatsoever. So dextrose, again, it's there just purely for water binding. It's to lock the moisture away. It does have both sorbitol and dextrose can have a sort of cooling effect on the mouth. So sometimes when you eat a chocolate, if it has quite a lot in, it can give you this sort of cooling sensation, much like coconut and things like that. So that's our sugars. All of our sugars that we've used in all of the recipes, everything is available through Keylink. In the recipes that you're going to receive, so we're going through the recipes, but you'll all be able to get them. Natasha's going to send out a lovely email with them later on. All of the stuff that we use is available through Keylink, so you can get everything that you require.
Now, I've just changed the saucepan. Did anybody see that?
I don't think so.
Because when you put your purees cream into there and you've got the sugars, I've now got to cook this to 106. And when I do that, it's really going to boil. And so there wasn't enough space in that saucepan for that to happen. So I'm hoping that this one's big enough. But we'll see. I've got another one waiting in the wings if it's not. So yeah, so we're just going to let that boil. Now, Claire, another question we always get asked is, can I use honey instead of invert sugar, don't we?
Yeah, and you can, but it's not as potent.
And it's not a true invert, is it?
Yes.
So it's only a partial invert. So I don't know whether any of you have had that honey pot in the cupboard and, you keep it for a while and then it starts to crystallise again. So it is an invert sugar and it is a natural invert sugar, but it's only a partial. So if you had that in your products, you could get that crystallisation happening in the products as well. So we tend to go for the proper fully invert sugars.
And again, it is the good thing with glucose and invert, they won't recrystallise.
Yeah.
So your ganaches won't become crystallised, whereas with it, like using sucrose and things like that, you can get that recrystallisation, which is not great.
Yeah, and also with the invert sugars and the glucoses, they are really good for keeping the moisture in, locking it in, aren't they? And, if you think about gingerbreads or, I don't know, syrup sponge or something like that, they are always really sticky and really moist because they have those syrups in there. And so that's what's helping our glucose and our invert sugars is keeping our ganache nice and soft.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we talk about alcohol?
I'd love to talk about alcohol, Claire. It's quite early in the day.
What are we having?
I would like Cointreau.
Cointreau, perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about alcohol as a preservative. Not as a self-preservative, but as a preservative for your chocolates. So, seamlessly, as I say, Keylink have got everything that we're using. So what we've got here is a gigantic bottle of Cointreau. But the alcohols that we get are higher in percentage volume, so they've got much more alcohol in there. What that means is we don't have to use as much in order to get that alcohol quantity. So we've got a slide to show you on this, and I'm going to try and talk you through it slowly. So we've got a recipe for a Cointreau Ganache, and what's in there is cream, chocolate, and Cointreau. But if we go over a certain amount of alcohol, then we get a 6-month shelf life. It means that nothing can grow because the alcohol is kind of sterilising the environment. So that percentage point is 17%. And what that means is the relative alcohol in your Ganache, in your water content of your Ganache, is over 17%. So to explain that, we've got a Ganache, so we've got, as I say, we've got chocolate, we've got cream. You can work out how much water is in your cream. So we've got a 35% whipping cream. So we've got 35% fat, the rest of it is water. And then we've got our alcohol, which is a 60% volume alcohol. So 60% of this is alcohol, 40% is water. So we can do quite a simple bit of maths, and we can work out how much of the water is pure alcohol. And in the recipe that you're going to get, 21% is pure alcohol. So you've got a really strong shelf life. You've got quite a strong alcohol flavour, but that's great if you like Cointreau. So
Yeah. But we do have to watch though, don't we? Because not all alcohol's the same.
Yes.
So, like everybody likes to make Bailey's truffles or things like that. Well, actually, there isn't that much alcohol actually in Bailey's. So there's a lot of cream, there's a lot of water, and there's a lot of other things. It's only a small percentage of the Irish whiskey or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas these ones that Keylink do are good because they're concentrates. So we don't have to add as much to get a really strong flavour, but they are giving us less water as well. So it's two things that they're really good for.
Yeah. So to really show this, we're going to... I should have already unwrapped these, but I didn't want any to escape. We've got questions.
We've just got a quick question backtracking a bit about the sorbitol. Is 20 grams of powdered sorbitol the same as 20 grams of liquid sorbitol?
No. No, because the liquid sorbitol does have some water in there. So we need to account for that. And I think it's a sort of, so it's like it's a 70% liquid, so it's like 70% sorbitol, 30% water. So we need to understand that we are adding water when we add the liquid sorbitol.
But whenever you buy anything from a distributor, you can get the specification sheets, and on the sheet it will give you all of this information because everybody's products will be different. So if we were ever really trying to work out our shelf life, the first thing we would be doing is getting the spec sheets. We're nearly at 105, we're going for 106. So that's really taking it up to, like a nice caramel as well.
We've just got a question from Alison about the alcohols. If we use 17% alcohol, do we have to have a license to sell it?
I think you have to have a license to sell the alcohol, but in terms of using it in your product...
As an ingredient?
You don't need to.
No, but if Natasha can just go onto the side screen there, that's a really good example of the... How do I do it? There we go.
Yeah.
Of the difference. So the first one...
Yeah, so the first one, the less... Oh, sorry,
this one?
The more. So the cup with the most in is the 40% Cointreau.
Yeah.
So in the Ganache that you're going to get the recipe for, if we used a 40% Cointreau, we would need that much alcohol to create a sterile environment to give us a 6-month shelf life. If we used a 60% Cointreau, then we'd need the smaller amount. So it's really quite a good sort of visual to show. I don't know if you can see it very well. I should have dyed it like blue or something. But it's,
no, you can't.
You can.
Yeah.
But you need almost double the amount of alcohol if you're sort of, to go from a 40% to a 60%. And
that's going to affect our overall setting of the Ganache as well, though,
it's going to really change the texture.
Yeah.
When you go to pipe it, it's going to be really, really fluid. It's just going to completely change the Ganache. You will still get that shelf life, but it's one of these considerations. And again, it's another reason why using the stronger alcohols can be really great and have a real purpose.
Yeah, and Keylink also do the 8% alcohol, which is totally neutral. And obviously it has a bit of an alcoholic taste, but it's not got a flavour to it. And again, that's for people who are looking to change the shelf life and to add alcohol in to help them, but not actually change the flavour. So again, there's lots of different options that you can have. I'm going to get these out of the way, Claire.
Okay. Is it possible to see that slide, Natasha?
Yeah, we're done. Yeah.
We're just going to That's it. So this is the recipe. So you can see here we've done a little bit of maths to show you how much alcohol is in there. As I say, we're aiming for over 17% to give us a 6-month shelf life. Just means no moulds and things can grow. You can see the workings out to sort of make it quite clear. And as I say, you need almost double the amount of alcohol for the 40% compared to the 60%. So hopefully this recipe makes what I've said just a little bit clearer and helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Claire, it does. So we finished the caramel here. So we've got the banana, the passion fruit, and the direct caramel, the cream. But I've also got white chocolate and butter. But if I pour that on now, that's at 106. You know, that's way too hot. So we're going to let that cool down for a bit, and then we're going to pour it onto our chocolate and mix it. And then we would let that cool down even further. And when we get to about 30, 32 degrees, we would start whisking in the butter as well. And then that's going to give you a lovely fruity, caramelly ganache, and it's really nice. And it's got an AW of 0.6. So when we talk about AW, do we have a slide on that? No.
No, you're going to get a piece sent to you.
A piece, okay. Yeah. So when we're looking at it, the AW, we're going to start at 1 and the base is 0. And in between there is, like this one was 0.67, so it's a really good shelf life. So we tend to say if it's at 0.8 and above, it's only 3 weeks, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a short shelf life. When you go below there, it's really, really good. So when we get down to 0.77, we've got 3 to 6 months shelf life.
Yep.
And when we go below that, we get longer. So now we're getting on to the 8-month shelf life, 9-month shelf life. And so again, when we're thinking about Christmas coming up, Halloween coming up and things like that, we want to make the chocolates that have got the really long shelf life earlier. So we could be making them in August or September. And then as you're getting towards Christmas and you want some that have got really short shelf lives, you make them later on. And then the whole box of chocolates would have your shortest shelf life. So it could have a month or something like that. So it's just trying to think about the ganaches you're going to make and then plan them in so that you don't overwhelm yourself, when it comes to that market time or whatever, that you're making loads and loads of chocolates.
Yeah.
But we also have brought in products, don't we?
Yes, I was going to say, so just as Julie's made this here, and we've got a really good shelf life of 0.67, there is going to be some variation between batches. Whereas if we buy in our product,
it's always going to be perfect, Claire.
we've got the Calabac caramel, which has got a year's shelf life, and every single time you open the bucket, it's going to be exactly the same recipe. So you've got that consistency and that reliability.
What are you saying?
I'm not saying anything against you, Julie. I know your caramels are very consistent and very reliable.
Yeah, we also have another product called Tintoretto, and Tintoretto is a fat-based filling. So we've got some out of the packet here, which is white, so it's quite hard to see. I'm going to put it onto the black marble, so you can see it's quite a hard filling. And this one we can soften it down, heat it up, but we don't want to take it too high because it's got fats in there and it's got chocolate in there. We don't really want to take it above 31, 32.
Yeah.
And you can add oils into it, but you can't add water into it because it's chocolate. So you could flavour it with orange oil, like cinnamon or all sorts of different flavours. But if you added liquid in there, it does seize. So you'd have to work with it really quickly. So we don't recommend that.
No, and again, you can get so many different flavour oils, again, through Keylink, but this is such a wide range. You can use this product and add your own flavour, and all of a sudden you've got a whole range almost.
Yeah, and also it's good for layering. So we could have a layer of this, and then we could have a layer of a ganache on top. So you could have a white base with orange in there, and then you could put your ganache on top. So it's also adding in texture and flavour to your chocolates.
Yep. So that your customers can have a multi-sensorial experience.
Of course, Claire.
How about that?
Yeah. Yes. So we do have a machine that actually measures the shelf life for us. It's called an AW machine, but all it's measuring is available water. And the available water is only part of shelf life, isn't it? And so everybody thinks that, we can use this machine and it's going to tell us that we've got 6 months, so that means we've got 6 months. It doesn't. It's still down to, like we said before, the working practices, how we're storing our chocolates, how well we've made our chocolates, and all those kind of things that are going to affect it as well.
Yeah, so it's an indicator, basically, and that's how we want to use it as such, as an indicator.
So the machine is here. I can't remember how much this cost, but it was about...
It's about 1,500.
100? Yeah. It's a tiny little machine. But on the back here, it's got a flip. There we've got a sensor. And what that does is it reads the water vapour that's coming off the Ganaches. And so it can tell you what the available water is.
Yep.
So we have a pot that we would fill halfway with Ganache, and we would need it to be at room temperature. So you must test your Ganaches all the time at the same temperature so that you get a really good reading.
Yeah, and so quite often, again, we ask everybody how they do their AWs to see what's happening in the industry. And a lot of people do a test sort of as soon as it's been made and cooled, and then 24 hours later, maybe even 48 hours later. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because when it's freshly made, it gives a good indication of its sort of initial binding. But then your chocolate, your cocoa butter, is also going to crystallise within your ganache. It's especially if you've done a tempered ganache, the cocoa butter crystals are changing, and it's helping to lock away the moisture as well. So your AW could change over the sort of first 48 hours that it's been made, just because of the chemistry that's going on within the ganache.
And the other thing you need to do if you do use one of those machines is you need to keep calibrating them. So we have little water sachets here. If I can get one out without destroying the bag. So they're just bottles, and they've actually got a solution in there that this one is 0.25. So I'm going to put that into the pot, and I'm going to turn the machine on, and it should give me the reading of 0.25. If it doesn't, there's instructions on how we change it. Because over time as well, that machine will come out of calibration. Yeah. So it's really important, especially if you've got important jobs that you do. We always calibrate first.
Yeah. And as I say, the AW machine, it's a great gadget, it's a great indicator, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It's not a guarantee of shelf life. We quite often suggest to people that they can send their ganaches away. It's quite an expensive process. We've been looking into it this week. There's a few companies around, and we can certainly give out details. But it also takes time, and a lot of the time these laboratories, they'll take your product and they will literally store it how you tell them to, and then they will investigate it at 3 months, at 6 months, at a year. So it does take a year. If you want to get a shelf life of a year, it will take a year to test that product. So it's a thought.
Because you have to be well in advance then, don't you?
Very prepared, very prepared.
Yeah. But we've got these examples here, haven't we, as well, to show why is it important to use some of these sugars. Because people say to us, well, I can't get dextrose, I can't get glucose, I can't get invert sugar, so can I just use sucrose? Can I just use castor sugar? And we're like, well, you can, but it is going to have an effect on your ganache. So you've made 3 here, Claire, haven't you? So we'll put this one first.
Yeah, should we start with this one? So it's the recipe, again, you're going to get this recipe. And what we've got is we've got cream, we've got sugar, we've got a bit of salt, and we've got a 70% chocolate. So we used the Cacao Fleur de Cow. But you can see on this, it's really...
the crystals there.
The sugar that we used was just sucrose, and it's really left it quite crystallised. And it's given it just not a great sheen. There's a little bit of fat that's escaped to the top. It just doesn't really look particularly appetising.
I don't want to eat it.
Okay. don't eat it, Julie.
Okay.
This is the next one in the chain. So we changed some of the sugar. So we used a little. That's good. We used some sucrose, but we also used a bit of glucose, and you can see it has made an impact. It has changed it, but it's really still not quite great. You can see that.
You can really see crystals on top there still.
Yeah, and a little bit of fat has come to the surface, and it's just not looking as perfect as we would like. So then the final one, And this is the recipe that is available to you guys. You can see it.
I'm not very good at this.
You can see it's got a real shine. Oh, that's it. Yeah, and it's a nice, quite thick consistency, but thick but fluid. It's sort of this yield phenomenon that means it flows nicely, but it is quite thick. It's just a beautiful ganache, the sort of ganache that you really want to eat and really want to produce.
Would you like me to put the recipe up for you?
Yeah, let's have a look at the recipe. So this gives you a shelf life, or a water activity, sorry, of 0.71, which is great. It's approximately 6 months, depending on all the other factors as we've discussed. But quite simple. So we've got the whipping cream, we've got invert sugar, glucose syrup, and then powdered sorbitol. That can be changed for liquid sorbitol. We'd need to up the amount of it to take into account the sort of extra water that we're adding. Maybe have a play with it, maybe reducing the cream a little. Yeah, and then we've got the chocolate and the butter. Now, it is an interesting point that sometimes we use butter or fats to bring down the shelf life, but the fat doesn't affect the AW. And that might seem strange, but because fat and water don't mix, it doesn't actually impact very much or at all the AW. So the sort of free water, fat is not binding it. So no matter how much fat you put in, the water sort of stays the same. It's not bound by it. And we want to bind and encapsulate that water so the fat won't do it for us.
It's not easy, Claire.
It's all right once you get your head around it.
Yeah. So, so these, I think they're a really good example. We need to take a photograph of them as well, don't we? And we'll put it up so that you can see on the website. But I just think that you start to think about what's actually on the shelves in the supermarkets, because they have to have over 6 months shelf life. So you think you've got your caramels. Well, we spoke about that. Mm-hmm. It's a solution that things can't grow in, so that's really good. So we've got the caramels. We've got the alcohols, so you also always have those rum truffles, or like the whiskey truffles or things like that. Or you have fillings that are fondant based, so they're like very high sugar again. So we haven't got an environment the bacteria can grow. And we do have other products that are really good for using for a long shelf life. So marzipans. So if you think about a marzipan, all that is the ground almonds and the sugar. So again, we like marzipans at Christmas, but they've got a year shelf life. So it's such a sugary environment that nothing's going to grow in there. And we also have pralines. So if you make a praline, you can do a praline centre by just using the praline and then adding some cocoa butter in there to give it a bit of a set and a bite. And again, the praline has got no water in there at all. It's just the nuts that are being ground down, and they've got the caramelised sugars added in. So these are really nice ones that you can add into your range that, again, you can do earlier on, and they're going to be a better shelf life. Yep. But what about the nuts, Claire? I've said it's a good shelf life, but there's a but.
There's always a but. So we do have to be careful, because our fat products generally have a lot of fat in there, and fat likes to cause a little bit of trouble. We tend to get blooming with very fatty products.
Yeah. So the nut fats are polyunsaturated, so they're liquid at room temperature. So they can migrate, they can move really easily, and that's what causes sometimes fat bloom. But do we have a question?
We do. Is it possible to have a ganache with 6 months of shelf life?
So the question was, is it possible to have a ganache with 6 months shelf life? Absolutely. Yes. But like we say, it's not going to be a ganache that is just cream, butter, and castor sugar. We're going to have to think about some other ingredients in there. So this is where we start to think about, am I going to use glucose, invert sugars, dextrose? And we use those sugars. Sometimes you'll get a recipe and it'll have 3 or 4 different sugars in there, and you go, oh, I can't be bothered with that. I haven't got those sugars. I'm just going to use the castor sugar. But they're in there for different reasons, like Claire said earlier. So to get that 6 month shelf life, we might add in dextrose or even maltodextrin, because that's like a bulking agent that's going to give us a lower sugar content, but it's actually going to bulk it out and give us a better body in our ganache. So it does depend, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's also, yes, we might want a shelf life of 6 months, but we have to compromise somewhere, and maybe the flavour and the texture is where we would have to compromise, because like Julie's shown the water activity meter, and we're looking at the vapour that it releases. Now, if we make a Ganache that has a very low water activity, there's a potential that if we don't store it right, it's going to absorb moisture and sort of change its texture. So things change over time, and we need to be aware of that. Also, flavours change. So it's a case of, if we want a 6-month shelf life from a Ganache, what are we prepared to negotiate on, as it were, and where are our boundaries, where are our limits to what we will accept?
Yeah, we do have a course coming up in the late summer, I think it's September, with Alexander Bordeaux, and he has actually developed a system called Ganache Solutions, where it's an online spreadsheet kind of thing. Portal, yeah, where you put all your ingredients into it, and it's going to work out your AW for you, and it's going to give you your shelf life, you know, in inverted commas. So it's going to give you your shelf life. But that one as well is a platform where you can change butters, you can change sugars and see what that does. So you don't actually have to do it physically and waste your ingredients. You could play around with it on the computer first. So that's really quite handy as well, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
We have another question.
Yes, we have a couple, but I'll start
Okay.
with the first one. Firstly, Holly says, great video. If we're replacing the cream and butter for plant-based alternatives, can you recommend some other ingredients?
We're a big fan of replacing for plant-based.
Yeah, we
ingredients.
both like plant-based,
Yes.
so, but it's very difficult, let me tell you. We've gone through loads and loads of different recipes, because plant-based cream is water. You know, there's hardly any fat in there, is there?
Although that's changing.
It's changing slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, there are a few out there.
Yeah.
I
So
think-
I think in terms of for professional use, we'd probably go for the Flora Professional range. You can get them in the litre Tetra Paks. In terms of butter, we'd go for Be Better Butter, which is lovely to say. It's not long come out, and it's been developed by one of the chefs we work with quite a lot, Marika van Beurden. And it's great. It doesn't have a taste, it's very neutral, but it's been designed to replicate butter in terms of texture.
Yeah, so I think what we look for there is, you know, we've got our cream, we've got our butters, but we look at fat content as well. So what is the fat content of the cream? So like I said, we use a 35% whipping cream in most of our recipes. So if our plant-based cream isn't 35% fat, it might be 20 or something like that. So we've got to add some fat into it to get that mouthfeel. And that's then when we would be adding in the plant-based butters, or we would be using some of the other ingredients like, I don't know, citrus malt, or, you know, there are other ingredients that you can use. But if you are interested in the plant-based, if you go onto the Calabout website and you put in Next chocolates, there is a whole load of recipes that have been developed by Marika and some of the other chefs in Belgium. And all the Ganaches are already on there, and they've already been worked out. So it's a really good resource, isn't it?
It's a fantastic resource. And we like to try and replace like for like, but it doesn't always work like that. So even if you have got a great plant-based cream and you're just subbing out, sometimes it'll work perfectly. Other recipes, you need to tweak things slightly. So it's never a case of,
One for one.
I'll just change that and it'll be perfect, because unfortunately it won't.
And also we've got the next range of chocolates, haven't we? So
Yes.
we've got the dairy-free chocolates, and they were in 10 kilo bags, but they've just come out in the 2.5 kilo bags, which is much more manageable. And we've got a milk and a dark. And they've been made in a factory that is totally allergen-free. So no dairy, no gluten, no soy, no nothing, apart from beautiful chocolate. So that's a really good one if you're doing plant-based.
And the second one is from Kayla. They say, can you substitute glycerol with glucose? Will it be the same measurement?
No, I wouldn't substitute glycerol with glucose, but I would sometimes substitute glycerol with sorbitol. So glycerol and sorbitol both bring down the AW in the recipes. And actually, I think glycerol actually has a higher depreciation. It takes it down a little bit lower.
More potent, yeah.
But for some reason, more people use the sorbitol than the glycerol. So you can use it, and it is a really good help with our shelf life. But it's not in replacement for the glucose, because it would have more of a laxative effect.
Yeah, again, because it ends with ol. It's a sugar alcohol. So it's where sorbitol and glycerol are in the same sort of family, so they're going to have the same sort of effect. But glucose is in a different family, so he'll have a slightly different effect.
Yeah, because we also have isomalt. Some people ask us about isomalt, and again, that's another sugar-reduced sugar. It is really good, but it's very drying and quite hard, so that has a real effect on recipes and things. So all of these, you know, it is in the sugar family, but they're not the same. You know, none of these are equal. So whenever you're playing with it, you do have to have a go and have a try.
And again, as well, I think, like we've just spoken about plant-based, and a lot of people are turning towards coconut sugar. And again, it's not the same. It's great to use. It has
Nice
great
flavour.
flavour. It has more sort of minerals and some good properties to it. But it's not exactly the same in its ability to bind water.
And it crystallises back quite quickly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just being aware of all these things, playing, trying, and just enjoying the process of learning, really. And what I will say is, obviously we knew this live stream was coming up, and we had some great chats with the guys at Keylink about your questions, about, you know, what everyone wants to know about shelf life, and hopefully we've covered this, but it is such a broad topic.
Yeah.
We've been brushing up on bits of knowledge, but there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn about the different sugars, about different methods that can help it, about what we're looking for when there's water activity. It's almost getting into chemistry, like real big chemistry. So
there's no golden bullet, is there? There's
No.
not one thing that's going to make you have an amazing shelf life. You've got to change the recipes. You've got to make sure your working methods are good. You've got to make sure the ingredients that you use, the quality of them is good. You've got to know that you understand what the water is in those ingredients. It's all those little bits, and it's quite daunting at first. You're just like, oh my God. But that's why those books that I mentioned earlier, the Chocolatier's Kitchen and the Jean-Pierre Weiber Gold book, are really good because they have recipes with the AW on there already. So you could take that recipe and say it had pear puree in there, for instance. You could add apple puree in there, and so you could change the recipe around, but you know you're in the same ballpark still, and so you can start working with that and developing your own flavours, but you have got a structure to work from, and it's already been worked out what the AW is. So I think that's a really easy way to start.
it's a nice place to start, yeah.
We have another one?
Yeah, we've got a couple just come in for us wrapping up. First one is, what about nuts/nut pastes on shelf life?
Well, like we said, nuts on their own. So you get lovely cashew butters, don't you, and praline butters and all that kind of stuff now. But if you just had them without the sugars, the oil in there is much more free, isn't it? So, you know, you are going to get the effect of the filling would be okay, because you could put the nut butter and you could put it in with the chocolate. And if you tempered the two together, you are going to kind of lock in that nut butter, so you're going to get a better kind of ganache. But that polyunsaturated fat will find its way to the surface. And after a while, it's not straight away, you know, it could be 3 months, 6 months, you might start to get like a grey sheen on the outside of your chocolates, and that's fat bloom, and that's come from the nut inside. So yes, you can use them, yeah, they're great. It would just depend on how much you used in that recipe to how quickly that happened.
And it's about sort of tempering that nut product. So like Julie said before, we quite often use cocoa butter to actually temper the praline. So
Lock it in.
terms of, we really bring that temperature down. We sort of melt the cocoa butter in and basically temper it. Some people even put it out onto the marble slab and temper it that way. Take it right down to sort of 26 degrees Celsius to get that cocoa butter to create its crystals and lock away the fat. So if you do that, that can really increase the shelf life in terms of, like, it would taste nice, but its actual texture and the way that you come to eat it in 3 to 6 months will be good, yeah.
So we've got two more before we call it. The first one's from Joe. They say, I sometimes do a fruit gel plus a ganache. How can I reduce sugars in the gel and still have a soft gel texture?
All right, we've got the first hard one.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
So how do we reduce the sugars in the gels and still have a nice soft texture? So again, with the fruit gels, sometimes we use pectin So we would use the fruit puree, we would use some sugar, and we would use pectin. And so you're getting more of a jam kind of texture, but you can lower the sugars because the pectin is helping to bind it. We use agar-agar as well, don't we?
Yep.
So again, we're not looking for the sugars this time to bind it. The agar-agar is binding it for us, so we can use lower sugars. But when you use the agar-agar, it makes a really hard gel. So, you know, like you might make the gel and then look at it and you go, well, that's no good. What were they talking about? But if you get that gel and then you blitz it down, so you use a hand blender or you do it in a food processor, that will come really soft again and it stays in that state. So it's a good way of doing it as well.
Yeah, I think it's sort of looking at the setting agent that you're using for the gel and investigating how much sugar is sort of needed. You often use sugar to get that product in. So I know, like with pectin, we always mix it with the sugar and then slowly add it to like the fruit purees. So it's looking at that, that binding and the sort of the gelling agent as to see what we can get away with.
Joe's apologised for the question.
It's okay.
No, we needed to be stretched.
But the last one comes from Simon, who says, if I just added glucose to a cream-based ganache without sorbitol, would this benefit the shelf life?
Yeah, it would a little bit, yeah. But again, it's the ratios.
Yes.
So, you know, like how much available water is in there. So, you know, like is your cream and chocolate 1-to-1 or is it 2-to-1? Because all of a sudden, if you've gone from like you've halved the cream and almost doubled the chocolate, you've got a much firmer ganache. So you might add glucose in there to help soften it a bit. But also by halving that cream, we've given the ganache a longer shelf life.
Yep.
And so it is, again, you know, like sometimes when you get the cut ganaches, you know, you want the ganaches to be a bit firmer. They have more chocolate in there. And so naturally, then they have a longer shelf life. So some of the things, we're already doing it, but we don't really think about it. It's only when you start to think about what are the ingredients, how much water is in there, that you start to see that some are better than others.
And I always think it's great to experiment, and as I say, we like this idea of making a batch and testing it every week. Not only do you get to eat chocolate every week, which I'm a big fan of, but you also get to see what happens and as it changes. And again, it's the sort of thing you can do is you can make a batch without glucose, make a batch with glucose, see what actually happens.
How it dries out or doesn't.
In terms of texture, in terms of flavour. Sometimes it can enhance flavours and really change things that you weren't intending it to change. So it's always great to experiment like that as well.
I mean, this experiment that we did with the sugars, the sorbitols and the glucoses and things, it's the first time we've done it. Yep. And it's something that we will do again because it really highlights what happens if you've just got sugar in there and things. So, and that was only by playing around and, you know, doing it for this demonstration that we're like, wow, that is such a difference. And you can really see then why that the glucose and the sorbitol and things are a favour, you know, for lots of chocolatiers.
Yep. We're going to try and get some good pictures of these as well, because I know it's not particularly easy to see on a screen. We're going to try and capture these, and we'll send them to everyone that's watched. As a prize! Sorry.
Yeah, that's all of it.
Brilliant.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, guys. Hope you've all really enjoyed it. It's definitely been some very informational stuff. And again, this stream will be up This stream will be up on our YouTube. So, from here on in, for you to come back and refer to. And again, there's lots of literature out there, and I hope we've encouraged you to sort of experiment yourselves to really sort of, you know, get a couple of these products and to play about with them, because that's truly the way that you're going to learn about it. So, again, thank you very much, guys.
No, thank you.
Hope you all enjoyed it.
Yep.
And we'll see you again
soon.
soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.